What is it that as a director we should be focusing on when we're reading a profit and loss statement? The exceptions, the variances. Why is that? Because that is telling us what is driving our business, the business of the non-profit. As a director, don't worry so much about the figures. Worry about what is happening versus what we said would happen. What's actually happening versus what we said would happen. And the best way of finding that is by looking at what are the English expressions of the variance. Because there's no good telling me that we are 20% over. There's a variance of 20%, positive variance of 20%. As a director, I want to know why. That's what I should be focusing on. The whys, not the figures. So when you're looking at your profit and loss statement, please, first thing, make sure that the variance explanations are in there, the description of variance. Now this is often done in the finance committee level, but as a director sitting around the board level, I want to know what those explanations are, because that tells me what's going on within the organisation much more than any financial figure will tell me. Does that make sense, what I'm saying there? As a director, I want to be focusing on the reasons for variance, not the figures. Now, balance sheets. How many here really love reading balance sheets? Next question, how many of us here, how many of us here actually know what a balance sheet is? And there's a few, and again, I find most balance sheets that I see miss the point totally. I mean, one of the things that I was taught when I was heading up the Society of Corporate Treasurers, because of course on my board were all the corporate treasurers who were also who were by and large chief financial officers who then went on to become corporate leaders and chief executive roles. One of the things they taught me is balance sheet. Steve, never forget, it's got a balance. So the first thing you do is make sure, okay. But the key thing behind a balance sheet is it is actually a description of relationships. What a balance sheet is tell you the relationships between certain things. So what I'm looking for as a director is, number one, if it hits the fan, how much money have we got? It's called the quick asset ratio or the liquidity ratio, right? If we're going into a major merger or we're looking at taking over another organisation and there's some staff unrest out there, then one of the key ratios might be how many times does our retained earnings cover staff entitlements? Not strictly balance sheet, but it's certainly a description of relationship. So what I'm looking for as a director is a description of the key relationships that the balance sheet should tell me. It could be debtor ratios, how much do people owe us versus how much do we owe. So there'll be 4, 5, 6 key ratios in there. Some of them will be strictly balance sheet, some of them will be a mixture. Now the trick behind ratios is this, and this is what I find missing. Our liquidity ratio is 1 is to 1.2. So, what does that actually mean? What I want to know is what's a good ratio and what's a bad ratio, and what do we have? Is good, is bad, is what we've got. Some organisations have it as acceptable range. So therefore, as a director, what's the first thing you look at? Are we within an acceptable range? If not, what are we going to do about it? Because then a balance sheet means something. What you're doing then is having a look at those relationships and saying, so a good ratio for liquidity is 1.2. We are 1.4, but last month we were 1.5. It seems to be slipping back to something that's not quite where we want. What are we going to do, staff? You're better off looking at it that way than all of a sudden finding out you don't have money when it hits the fan. Does that make sense, what I'm saying? The key ratio. So as a director, I'm looking for what those key ratios are. And this is where your snapshot, your dashboard reporting can be really useful.